lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today, I have two awesome creators with me. I have Tony Fleecs, Tim Seeley. We're going to talk some Local Man. The new special just came out this week as of the day we're recording this. Very excited to have you guys on and kind of, jump into it and talk Local Man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having us.
Dude, my pleasure. So let's talk about since we're jumping in after the first volume is already done, let's talk about how this project came about. I mean, anybody that's read the book knows to me it's like a love letter to like 90s Image comic books. I mean, from the inside front cover to your letters pages or the commentary in the back, stuff like that. So let's talk about how that book came about.
Me and Tim have been friends for years, and we were set up at a convention together in Long Beach, and we were talking comics. And when we start talking comics, we often start talking like 90s comics and stuff that we dug about 90s comics. And we were sitting next to Norm Rapmund, who inked like a ton of the early Extreme Studios books. And he brought a page of Brigade with him from Brigade issue 1. And me and Tim and Norm Rapmund, I don't know if it was as seminal a moment for Tim, but for me, it was just like looking into like the face of God. It was just like, because it wasn't, like you've seen the Youngblood pages they're like perfect to start with, but this, I'm such a like process nerd, and I love I sort of romanticize the idea of these studios and like who was making these comics when I was a kid reading them. And so on this Brigade page, you could see Matt Michaels drawing his first book and Norm inking his first book. And then Rob Liefeld had just drawn the faces over top of all the Marat faces because he just wasn't there yet. But you could peel them up and see, and just like seeing the process there was so inspiring to me. And I think that's sort of like where the spark of this thing came from, because it wasn't long after that we started talking about we should do something that's like early Image, has something to do with early Image. And Tim said, what if we did a 90s Image comic crossed with a 90s Vertigo comic?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I've been loving the book personally. I think it's awesome. I'm of the age where like I was a little bit late to 90s Image, but I've gone back but yeah, I think it's funny because like I think the generation 90s nostalgia is, I think, in like full swing, at least in my opinion. I think it's like kids, maybe a little bit older than me, maybe a little bit, my age, now you can afford to go back and buy all the shit your parents wouldn't.
It was cheap. I mean, there's so many of them. Well, I think part of the thing Tony and I were talking about earlier about it was that we love the kind of energy and the designs and that era of how it was sort of made for, it was sort of just crack for a certain age group. But we also were like well aware of what's bad about it. I mean that it's so focused on one age group that it's to the exclusion of just about anybody else. And the business practices were kind of not great then, and retailers kind of paid the price for some of that stuff. So we thought, is there a way to tell a story that's set in the modern day, and it's not strictly nostalgia, and it's not strictly, tied to this era. It's not a retro comic, because I think when you do that sort of thing, you kind of, become a little bit irrelevant to some degree by making something that doesn't speak to now. So we knew it had to be both things. If, it would be fun for us to do the retro stuff. It would be fun for us to draw in different styles that we don't get to do normally, but we knew it couldn't just be that. It couldn't just be like, hey, this comic looks like a 90s comic, because there are people doing that, and it's been said and it's been done, and I felt like we didn't want to do that either.
Like I think that most of the early Image stuff, I mean, it's called Image for a reason, right? Was more about the image and what you were looking at, and maybe not so writer focused. So watching you two kind of come together and make this like kind of like noir story that's integrated within the Image universe, right? And like in this Local Man Gold is definitely showing that your characters are a part of Image. How much of that was did you talk to any of like the Image founders, like when you were going to approach that, and kind of, obviously you had to ask permission, I'm assuming, to use the characters that we have in the book?
Yes, we had to ask permission for sure. We do a little bit of fast and loose, like in the first series. We mentioned stuff, like Mel Bourget is mentioned, and characters are sort of, so that they're in the same world. But we knew that with Gold, it was going to be about this interaction, this giant team up, which when you actually read it, you realize it's actually the team up between Jack and himself. But the structure was going to be this big Image crossover, so we definitely asked permission. Fortunately, we between Tony and I think we know everybody who's ever worked in comics. I think so. So we were able to reach out and get some characters to use.
And we didn't ask permission before we started making the comic because we were sort of operating under the original sort of like Image founding documents, where it's like, these newscasters belong to everyone. Everyone exists in the same world. It's if you're an Image comic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's probably changed since 1992, but Tim and I are originalists. And so we're just like, that's what it said in the fucking Constitution. That's what it means.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. Well, let's jump into this issue because I absolutely loved this comic.
I have a physical copy to look at because I like it this way.
So, like I said, local man gold. Anybody that knows this trade dress should know what this is from. Why the decision to tie it into Deathmate when you were going to do a special?
Well, it was sort of the inciting idea of this one was we were wrapping up the first arc, or we'd had the scripts done for the end of the first arc. We sort of knew where it was going. And I said, what if after the first arc we do a Deathmate? And it's just like a big old Image Comics crossover and sort of like an opportunity to bring in new readers, do a repilot basically, where you sort of you tell new readers what was going on in that book in the first arc. And the idea was this is a crossover that happens on the fringes of a crossover. So like whatever, Freak Force was doing during Deathmate or whatever Spawn was doing during Deathmate, that's sort of what this is about. And so then just because I am a nerd for stealing old design motifs, the idea was just like, let's just make it as on the nose as possible and make it look like Deathmate.
It was kind of hard not to. So Deathmate is so notorious for a whole lot of reasons, and part of it is that it was late and it was overordered, and it was also very detrimental to comic stores and to Valiant. And so it was, if we were going to do it, I think we also were like, we've got to sort of know, in the same way that we kind of gently poke fun at some of the other stuff, we had to make a little bit of fun of Deathmate as well.
So which was your favorite issue of Deathmate, Bobby?
Everybody's is black, right?
Mine's the first half of red.
Yeah, I like red.
But red. Also the prologue and the prelude, both pretty great too.
Yeah, that's true. The prologue is pretty great. Was that the one with Barry Windsor Smith and Jim Lee?
Jim Lee, yeah, and then it's Joe Quesada and Silvestri on the prologue, which is the epilogue.
Prologue, that's it. Yeah. There's some awesome art in there, and it's very evident from those books. Wildstorm and Valiant took it really seriously.
Yeah.
And maybe Extreme didn't take it quite as seriously as the other ones did.
Yeah, we find out, later on that Liefeld just wanted to do that one shot, and then everything else sort of grew out of it. So like all the details and how everything fits together, that was definitely Valiant and Wildstorm going like, what if the Geomancer and this other stuff?
It definitely felt like a clusterfuck at some points. So we open up and we get a different version of Crossjack. We get this Crossfire. So we're already getting inklings of this is a different version of the character, correct?
Yeah, Tim, explain our Golden Age.
Okay, so in the original, this is in the weeds, and not everybody needs to know this. So if you will zone out, go ahead and do so now. But in the original story, it was an Image crossover of Valiant Comics. Valiant was a company that leased a bunch of characters from Gold Key, including Turok and Dr. Solar, and who became Solar Man and the Atom, and Magnus Robot Fighter, and then added a bunch of their own characters, including Hardcore and Shadow Man and stuff like that. So we don't have Valiant here, obviously, nor do we have the Gold Key characters. So to make this other universe that they cross over with, we used a bunch of existing public domain superheroes, mostly from Nedor Comics, but a few from other stuff like Fiction House. And the idea here is that you open up in media res in a crossover that's existing already, and the universes have already been fused, and they've already gone through some kind of giant story where they were trying to decide what to do if they should unfuse the universe.
That was sort of like one of the great one of the great 90s crossover staples was all your characters would get squashed together. And so, amalgam comics from Marvel and DC, and all the Deathmate characters got squashed together. And then there's a Jim Valentino Image crossover called Altered Image, where he just squashes together different Image characters.
It was actually called Everybody Squoosh Now.
Yeah, that was the issue's title.
I haven't seen that one. I need to read that.
Yeah, it's great. And it's one of those, if we were going to do something, but going in local man story mode, the way that we do things is when those things happen, then they have dark and disturbing psychological effects on the people who it happens to.
Yeah, so this is our guy Jack, who has like a 90s amount of angst at this point, crossing with a golden age character who's sort of like a simple superhero, and then when they come out of it, he's sort of tainted this guy with the knowledge of all the darkness that would come in the 90s.
And this is a Will Eisner creation.
Yeah.
Go. That I didn't even know. I didn't even know that until the very back of the book. Where was the decision to have a Will Eisner creation in there?
A lot of the characters that are now public domain did come from and were created by Fiction House, including Phantoma, because they were churning shit out. Will Eisner's, he's obviously a great cartoonist and did a lot of stuff for syndicates, but historically he was the first guy to sort of start a studio, and because comics were so in demand at the time and they were switching from strips to comic books, to the published book, he had a whole studio of people just cracking stuff out. And some of those companies were not well run, including, whatever the case would be, they didn't have the legal stuff set up so that when those companies went out of business, the characters passed into the public domain. So Phantoma is one of those, and the Flame from Netor and Miss Mask, and a lot of those characters came out of studios like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely I know Will Eisner, but there's some of the characters like you mentioned, I definitely was not aware of them prior to seeing them here.
No need, but if you like to, you can get into the weeds with us, because I teach a comics cartooning history class, so I'm super into this crap. So.
Yeah, I'd love to learn that stuff. I'm a nerd about it too. So so I haven't seen this in person. Is this an actual gold foil cover?
Oh yeah.
God dang it, I need that. All right.
Here's this one. Yeah, Tony has that one. And then so it's flip book, and it's a gold foil cover on the other side, which, as we found out, is really expensive to do. We do not recommend.
Yeah, if you're gonna do gold foil, just do it on one side.
One side, don't do the other side.
Right.
This one is obvious, more of an obvious homage to sort of Deathmate thing, which saw the characters merge together. Again, none of this is important for you to know, but if you do know it, it'll add to your experience.
It's completely accidental on my end. Like when I roughed that out, I was just like, oh, they just be splitting apart, and then we'll do it like Deathmate. There will be like all the effects and all the flares and stuff flying around them was on purpose. But then when I looked at the cover, the Deathmate cover, I was just like, oh shit, they're doing the exact same thing as Void and Solar Man of the Atom.
It's embedded in your brain, dude.
Yeah, it's just what my blood is made of.
Again, see, like this stuff right here, the inside with the credits. I love this. It just all the memories come back when I see stuff like this.
Yeah, we're ripping off all the great designers that came before us, and really with no credits, but thank you if any of you are listening.
Thank you, great designers.
Thank you, Kurt Hathaway, I think.
So we get in and we are with Crossjack. And how long does this take place after the end of the last series, like where we left him last?
It's probably a couple weeks later.
A couple weeks probably.
I love his relationship with his parents. I think it's one of the funniest aspects of this book.
Yeah,
only a little bit, because my parents are from Wisconsin, and I did leave Wisconsin, and I don't want them to think that we're writing this as like, hey, this is sort of like you, because my parents are nothing like Jack.
Oh, we're definitely not. Like the first draft of the first issue, before I did my pass on it, his folks were so nice to him that I was just like, what is this? I
know, I grew up with my parents, and it's hard for me to make shitty.
Yeah, I love my folks too, but I have no problem making these guys dicks. So
Yeah, I wouldn't have any problem either. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, sometimes it gets close to, because that town is not like the one I grew up in exactly, but it's close. It's close. So
Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I love these scenes because all these people, the way I draw the modern day stuff in Local Man is I do it with a lot of photo reference. So all these characters are people that I know and that I spend time with and stuff. So it's fun to see, you know, like Jack's dad is my buddy Mark, and Jack's played by my buddy Colin. So it's just fun to see like everybody mixing it up.
That's
You,
something that I definitely love about the book too, because it is a flip book, right?
yeah,
Or the regular series. I mean, I don't know how it flips here because again, I read it digitally, but I like the different art styles and how when you're basically in the 90s, and you're in
right.
that world. It's a cool little contrast, and to like get this more of like a noir type vibe in the present day.
And we have fun flipping to like if we're in the modern day and he has like a flashback, it's fun. We always have fun sort of like letting Tim pop in and draw that part of it. Or we've done things where like if he starts to feel more like his old self, Tim will draw that part of it too.
Got his dog Pepper with him.
Yeah.
very important character, but not to this story, not to this particular story. So we had to get Pepper out of the scene for this one because he has lots of other people to talk to, so he doesn't have to talk to the dog.
Yeah. Tim's really Pepper's advocate. He's always putting Pepper in places, and I'm like, why is the dog here? He has to talk to somebody.
I like this panel right here where it says "stay," and he's just sitting there so patiently. I don't know. That panel made me laugh when I looked at it for some reason. I love that he's like, so he's just like fully, he's, for everybody that doesn't know about Crosscheck, if you haven't already read the series and you're just picking this up because you see it's a one shot, he's been banished. He's not allowed to practice superheroics, right, anymore. And now he just like walks around with this ski mask on, which is hilarious, I think.
Everybody knows who he is beneath the mask, but for copyright reasons, he must hide himself basically because he's owned by the corporation, and he definitely can't use the costume that is now part of the Crossjack costume. That's part of Third Gen's legal property.
It's sort of like when you put a brown bag around a tall boy, you can walk around outdoors with it.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
that sort of legal hand waving.
That's legal. Yeah, that's kind of how this works. That we figured.
So they're just, I don't remember this in the last issue. Like, so they're basically more accepting of him now in his hometown, doing what he does, whereas before they didn't want anything to do with him.
Well,
So, sort of like through the events of the first series, the cops at least have seen that there's more to what's going on with him than whatever. Like everybody still pretty much hates him, but at least this guy's at least like, all right, just shut up and come with me.
yeah, his relationship with the police is basically that when stuff shows up now, if it's if they're sort of like, well, it's his fault, he's got to fucking deal with it.
Okay, you're a mess, you fucking clean it up, kind of deal.
You came back and now we got superhero shit, so then you got to do it. We're not going to deal with it. Which is how when they find himself, they're like, yeah, we don't know. Go ahead.
So this is the first page that we're doing like Image United style, which was the real fun idea of this crossover. Was when we were talking about it and going back and forth, it was like, oh, then we can draw on the same page and you draw the superheroes and I'll draw the regular guys and backgrounds and stuff. So this is the first time that happens.
Yeah, which is an interesting process. It's easier now than it would have been back in the 90s or even when they did Image United, because they had to ship around pages to everybody. Whereas what we can just do is we have used Procreate, which is a program we both use. And so Tony will do a layout and I'll draw my piece and then I'll send it back to Tony and he'll draw everything around it. So I drew that Crossjack over Tony's layouts, and then sort of laid in where he would go, and then Tony finished the rest of it around that. And the thing that took the longest was Tony draws his figures with big heads and little bodies like a cartoon guy. So I have to stretch them out. That's like my job throughout, is to stretch them out to image proportions.
It's got to be such a fun process though, doing that in that Image United type of style where like you guys like, because like Tony, like you're saying, you're laying it out and then you get it back finished. So you're getting a completely different piece of art back and stuff like that. And it seems like an even more of a collaboration than just your regular comic book. What was the experience like doing something like this? Is this something that you guys want to do again?
I mean, I'm not against the idea, but we do stuff like this pretty much in every issue. But doing it for a whole issue was probably the most collaborative. I don't know, I've done some pretty collaborative stuff, but only because I'm like a control freak. This one was collaborative in like the traditional, like the way you're supposed to do it sort of way.
Yeah, and I actually had a lot of fun with it. The way that this ended up going schedule wise was like an hour at the end of every day, so I would write scripts or whatever all day, and then an hour at the end of every day I would see whatever Tony had loaded up and I would draw my portions, like an hour every day for the entire summer, pretty much. I drew some amount of cross jacks or boofs or whatever the fuck else.
Boof. I didn't even know who the hell Boof was until
Right.
I know.
I'm kind of surprised. You know what? There's a fair amount of these characters that people didn't know. And it is a reminder that not everybody's as plugged in as we are. So like, it's good to be able to be like, hey, you don't need to know this stuff. We'll explain it to you. But if you enjoy it, you can go find an entire run of Boof and the Bruce Crew. So we're happy to act as your gateway.
I appreciate
Hopefully they're
it.
getting more expensive after this. That's what I.
Yeah, the speculator market will be all on top of it now.
This is one of my favorite interactions, and one I wish we could have done more with, but this story wasn't about it. But that Inga, who is his ex-girlfriend, she dated him when he was this age. So, now he's in his 40s or something, and but when she sees him, when she first walks in, she's like, I mean, can you imagine that? Like, you saw your high school girlfriend and she looked the same as you did when you dated her. And so he's just like, she's trying to be cool, but she's kind of, it's either making her sweat or confused or both. We're not sure.
I know. I like the comment. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I read this wrong. Maybe it wasn't intended, but he's too perfect not to be you. Like I read that and she's basically kind of like, I'm into him. And her fucking husband's standing right behind her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which also ties into, if you read the previous arc, that that why that she thinks that way. But I like that Jack, when he sees her, is like, hey, like finger guns, like what a douchebag.
He is a huge douchebag, this version.
Right off the bat, you know what kind of guy he is.
Yeah. I think that's my favorite part of, I mean, it's cool to see some of the other characters you guys bring in, but I like stuff like this in comics where you see like the future or the present day version interacting with their past, especially when like there's a huge difference in not personality, but in their whole get down. Like, he's been through so much shit since he was this age. So to see him and even commenting on himself, is seeing how douchey he was, and commenting on it was probably my favorite part of the book.
Well, that's sort of the premise of the whole thing was like, what if you could talk to your younger self? And if this book is about this guy and sort of like his midlife crisis, and sort of like choices that he made and wishing that he would have done things differently, what if you could see all those mistakes you made in person and talk to them or yell at them or beat them up?
No, and the one thing we wanted this to be was that all these comic book stories, superhero stories, have had the thing where you see the young character go into the future and see the old version of themselves, Days of Future Past or whatever, and then it's from the perspective of the younger person seeing the older. And we thought, well, what if this story is you're yourself and you're now, a younger version of you comes to town and you realize that you're the old person living in the apocalyptic shitty future, right? So it's like the opposite. It's like the flip on all that stuff. So now your point of view person is this age guy, and he lives in a world that's clearly pretty fucked up. And young Jack is mostly concerned about things that don't involve this world that he comes to be in, and why that ends up that way. He's more concerned of, why are you such a loser?
Yeah. So we get the characters that are going to be basically on this ragtag team. What was or how did you guys decide who you wanted to include in this?
That's a good question. I don't think did we put forth anyone that we didn't get? Not really, right? For some reason, this is pretty much the team that we picked.
Oh, there's one later that we had to go with the second option. But yeah, on these ones, it was just like Tim said earlier, we know so many people that it was just like, well, what if we reach out to them and ask? This is all favor stuff too. Like, Local Man doesn't make the kind of money where it's just like, we'll give you a percentage of, gross or whatever, like, it's just like, would it be cool if we use your character in this thing? And so like Tim went and inquired about Boof at Todd McFarlane Productions, and he asked Jay Faerber and Jim Rugg about their characters, and Tom King. And I'm buddies with Phil and Andy, so I asked them about Fire Breather, and then I'm real tight with Elena, who runs things over at Top Cow, and I said, could you inquire please and see if we could maybe use Stryker, because I've had a Stryker joke that I wanted to do for my whole life, and I was just like, here it is, my opportunity, let's go.
It was so worth it. So worth it.
It was a lot of rigmarole to get that out of my system. But you know what? So you got like just like a itch that you need to scratch.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I personally love the choice. I mean, Street Angel I thought was a really cool choice. It's not something that I would have seen. Obviously, Boof I didn't know until it was solicited for this issue, and then I looked up who Boof was, and I didn't know. But Stryker I know, Dynamo 5 I know. Fire Breather is like, I wouldn't say maybe a deep cut, but I don't think a lot of people know who Fire Breather is. But I love the character, so I was really stoked that you guys put Fire Breather.
He had a great Cartoon Network animated film, so I hope more people check out Fire Breather. It is one of the best Image teen superhero series ever made. So I hope
it's great.
It's really good. And one of the things we wanted to make sure we did here is, because this is sort of like pulling people from all throughout time, that they didn't need to be just 90s Image characters. They could be, from Dynamo 5 and Fire Breather are from like the early 2000s. Image actually was going to have like a unified line of superheroes around Invincible. So Invincible, Dynamo 5 and Fire Breather, and Noble Causes, and
there's that clock character, right? Like I think it was Mike Huddleston. Can't remember the name of the book. Clock King or something like that. I don't know.
Well, there was Union Jack. What's his name? Jack.
The Paul Grist book.
Paul Grist book and stuff. And so they're all sort of part of this like little mini launch.
Jack Staff.
Jack Staff. Yep. And so they're kind of all around that. And so I figured that it would be okay then for Scrap and Fire Breather to show up. And Dynamo 5 is one of my favorite Image superhero books of all time. It's awesome. It's Jay Faerber. Mahmoud Asrar is the artist in the first several issues. It's really good.
And then Street Angel didn't even actually start at Image, but she, they brought her to Image probably like 10 years ago or more. But she's sort of from around that early 2000s time too. And I like the idea of doing a character, because I knew Tim was going to be drawing these different styles. I like the idea of doing a character that sort of existed in like a different format comic almost. Where, like you'll see as we go on, but like when Street Angel has sound effects, her sound effects are different. And so like just the idea of like being able to do some formal stuff with her, I was excited about.
Yeah, I also love seeing like the old version of Cyberforce. Not to say that I don't like the new stuff, but this is my version of Stryker too. So I have a hard time accepting like the newer, sleeker versions that they've come out with.
It is such a perfect design. I like drawing it made me realize how good the design for Stryker is, because on the surface it's sort of should seem kind of goofy and clunky, but it's never, somehow Mark made it so it's never clunky. I think it's just the way he draws is so slick and sexy that it kind of hides stuff like that. But like, big cyber chunks sticking out of a dude still looks sleek when Mark does it.
Yeah, it feels balanced, even though obviously no way it's balanced.
Right? Yeah, totally.
And there's Joan from Love Everlasting, which I think is the most outside of the box Tim went with his art, where he was just like, I'm doing exactly how she draws it.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, it looks so different, even though that, like, I know you both are drawing it, but it looks so distinct to Elsa's style of drawing.
That was the toughest one because I'm used to, and in all the other characters, it's about adding more lines, and for Elsa, it's about taking away lines, and it took me a little while. I mean, also kind of an Andy Kuhn Fire Breather thing, but yeah.
Yeah, you did a lot of Andy. There's that page coming up that's just Joan and Fire Breather, and it looks like who knows who drew that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think you did a great job of capturing Andy's style for Fire Breather. That was one of my favorite books from that launch. With that you mentioned, when Image was going to do a new superhero universe, it didn't really like take fully, but it was always one of my favorite books for sure.
And then when the interesting thing about drawing this is when I was drawing it, I felt like I was putting so many lines on Boof, and then now I look at it, it's like, huh, I could have put more on there. I didn't go full John Cleary, Todd McFarlane on this, even though to me it felt like I was like, my God, that's a lot of damn lines. So
Yeah, it all comes out in the wash.
yeah, exactly. But this is one of my favorite sequences as well when they a truck pulls up to give them a ride to the apocalypse basically. So instead of like getting to ride like a gen jet, or like some kind of fancy vehicle, uh like a vertical takeoff type thing, just a shitty truck pulls off to give a ride. And then of course Crosscheck is like thinks that this is a third gen thing, and old Jack just says, no, I ordered it with an app. And Jack's so impressed, his future is amazing, and Scrap says, is it? They invented taxis. That's kind of, if you had to explain to someone how great the future is, like you could just use your phone to get someone to give you a ride. It's like, yeah, that's just a taxi. That's
Yeah.
not. There's nothing fancy about that.
This
This is great right here with Jesse smacking it with a skateboard.
Uber driver is one of my best friends, is the model for this guy, and he's always bringing me new story ideas, the things the Uber driver might do. So he's very invested in the story.
Yeah. Well, that's great. We'll have to maybe Uber. It's a driver, right? Because he's actually
Right.
he uses the app from Kyle Higgins' universe, the Supermassive universe. It's a subtle crossover, but we felt like it was important.
People did notice that though. I was excited when I saw on social media somebody was like, "Wait a minute, is this Driver from Radiant Black?"
Yeah, yes. Well, I like that stuff when I was a kid. When characters would show up, and like the news thing you said, when you'd see other people draw the news reporters from
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's stuff that like I would even say you don't even really see it at Marvel DC as much anymore. You don't really see people guest starring in each other's books. You don't really see that kind of like cross pollination between lines and stuff. It feels to me, very separate, more so than it ever has in all of my reading comic books. I don't know if that's, I'm not trying to knock anything. I don't know if that's editorial or if they're just choosing to keep things separate, but it doesn't feel like there's that cohesion of a line of like a whole publishing line as opposed to like the different families of books, like X-Men's with X-Men, Avengers with Avengers. It's something I wish Image would kind of do more of. I like that about the early Image, and now everything is just basically separate.
this is one of the funny things about doing this in our book at Image, which is actually like the most separate of any company. Like every book is just its own little business. Like for them to cross over, it does take like people calling other people and like going out of their way. Where like Marvel or DC, you could just this one's got Wolverine.
And part of it's because nobody's at the same office anymore. That's part of the cohesion. Everybody's on Zoom and using Slack or whatever to do stuff. So
that's interesting.
It's a little bit less cohesive because I was an intern at Marvel, and you would just walk next door and be like, "Hey, what's Aunt May doing? Because I want to use her. Has a walkthrough in this issue of Nova or something." And now that doesn't. It's not the same. It's just it's all done remotely.
I feel like at least the Image founders, if nothing else, at least they could be like, all right, you guys can use these characters
right
in your books. I just need to approve it. Almost as if you're like sending it to approval for a licensor or something. Just be like, I just want to make sure my characters are in line with, what they should be, but you guys are allowed to kind of play in that sandbox.
Yeah, that was the coolest. I love seeing like the Jim Lee Youngblood in Wildcats #3, or
yeah, dude.
Whenever Spawn would show up in Youngblood, or Chapel.
Some of my favorite issues.
Yeah.
And I always thought, like when I first started doing comics, one of the first books I ever did was Love Bunny Mr. Hell. And Eric Larson let me use Savage Dragon. Just let me use him. And that was like my favorite character. And for that to happen, I've always felt like I had to pay that forward. So like to this day, when people ask to use Cassian Vlad or something, I was like, yeah, go ahead. So I feel like I'm trying to pay that back. So the kind of fun that this is just, that's the kind of, I wish comics was more like that. It for us it is because we have a superhero book and it's easy to blend stuff, but it's not, a lot of Image titles now are like very specifically they have to be in their own universe. Like you can't have a cameo by like Rick from Walking Dead because it just doesn't work, like he's by design in a completely different universe, or like Fish Flies or something from Jeff or whatever. Is like these are very specifically their own thing, and it's really hard to make crossovers. But I tried it like with a Revival. I put fucking Tony Chu in there, so I will try when I can. So
this top panel made me laugh out loud, even though I know that a lot of people could be very offended by it. But I love that, in the next panel, Jack's like, dude, you can't do that. You can't say that shit. Because that is something that people, I don't know, when I was a kid, people were saying that all the time, dude. It was
and worse, and probably worse.
Probably a lot worse, yeah.
And so
but that was a phrase flung around for sure.
Yeah. And this is what Tony and I went back and forth on, because we had him say different things, and I was like, he can't, even that one he can't say. Like, even if he gets called out for it, that was the one tough, trying to find the thing that we would have be very indicative of a guy from 25 years ago would feel comfortable throwing around, and someone now would be like, yeah, that's not cool.
This is kind of where he gives the lowdown on like how his life is, what it is now as compared to what it was back then. And these are a great series of panels right here.
One thing I wanted to do too is that, like, the rules of whatever this crossover that's going on in the background weren't that important to the story, but there's just a few, which is that, like, because there's time travel involved, and Jack he doesn't remember that well because he went to the future, and because it didn't happen yet, his memory is not that great for it. So that's what we want to make sure. That's one rule of time travel in our universe. And then the other one is, and we don't know if it's true or not, is that old Jack's like, we can't talk about it because this might fuck things up. So, I'm not going to tell you anything, but it also might just be that he doesn't want to talk about it. So you're unsure of why. He just says paradox stuff. Don't talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely saw it as sort of 50-50. Like, he's just going off of Back to the Future rules. And also the last thing he wants to talk about is how fucked his life is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think Back to the Future rules make it so much easier, in my opinion, story-wise at least, so it doesn't get all convoluted, because time travel can always be very, very complex, and like rack your mind thinking about, well, did this happen? Did that person get affected in that way? All that kind of stuff.
Well, we didn't want to do too much in this story, like leaning on the time travel, because the time travel was just a way to get all these characters here and sort of like have the crossover be happening. But we didn't want it to be like Bill and Ted stuff where it's like, well, we'll just leave the car keys over here and then they'll be there. Like, we didn't want stuff to like end up relying on that.
Yeah.
Still tell the story that we were telling, just with time travel happening around the outside of it.
And it's only sort of vaguely a time travel thing because it is in fact like a sort of multiversal war going on. It's just that because they're fighting outside of time, they can kind of jump around and pull people from different places. So
yeah,
which is also an excuse for us to use a bunch of different characters.
Right.
It's your first appearance of the Flame, and this is one thing that we talked about too, was that the Valiant characters were always like the opposite of the Image characters as far as how they were drawn. So Image characters were always like super jacked up and tons of crazy shit on them, and they were like colored with the slickest modern stuff. And the Valiant characters were the opposite. They were like, drawn usually like by David Lapham or somebody who had a very like sort of reserved style. And so they weren't exaggerated, and they didn't have tons of gear, and they weren't always like super cool. Like, and I mean cool like in the KEWL cool. Like so we thought that the Flame should be drawn sort of similar to the way that the rest of Farmington is. So Tony took the Flame on.
We're like, we need this guy to be drawn lame, and then like, this is a job for Tony.
But he actually looks really cool. And we redesigned the costume just a little so that, because they would have, and Valiant, they didn't use them just like fresh out of the box. They did redesign them a little bit. So we just mildly tweaked his costume. So it's like 90s uncool instead of
40s by way of the 90s.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, the Valiant characters had like a generic look to them without I'm not trying to be mean, but some of them had just like a very generic, like thin, sleek style, like not, like you said, not very yoked or anything.
Yeah, more traditional superhero style.
Yeah.
And but the Flame, his story is crazy because he's basically sort of like a lot of the superheroes from that time are sort of a combination. They're really more pulp influence, so like, because there wasn't a lot of other superheroes besides Superman and stuff. So he's more of a shadow character. He's like a Zen, they always had like a guy, like a white guy who like traveled to like some Buddhist temple and picked up all kinds of skills and shit and came back. So he's like the fire shadow, which is actually pretty cool. So he's like that, like the era of Green Llama and Black Terror and all those sort of characters that had that kind of some kind of weird Eastern religion background.
Scene right here with Bridget and Crosscheck, hilarious too. He is such a douchebag. that cocky lean, dude. That lean right there with the thumbs up.
Yeah, Tim just
totally
slides
sells
it.
What's that?
Tim just slides right into it like he
Well, Crossjack is definitely me at 25, like for sure. Because I was very much that guy. And the shotgun flirt thing, that was me 100%. That was where that comes from. That was a thing that someone called me out for when I was 25, so maybe 26 or something. So it definitely comes from some amount of experience of being like the just total horn dog, trying to, whatever would work to get you close to the pretty lady, I would have done it. And Bridget would have been my type. So that is definitely me playing out my own terrible past.
I've never heard of that phrase. Is that a phrase? Shotgun flirt?
I don't know.
Okay.
I've known I don't know if anybody else uses it, but it's that thing where you just like try. You're just like, oh, I'll just throw something out and see if it sticks, and then you kind of, you try it on everybody. That is definitely me at 25.
Instead of like a targeted, laser scope type flirt where you zero.
Right, yeah.
Shotgun's more like maybe buckshot flirt.
Yeah, maybe that would be it. Yeah, I wasn't a sniper at that point in my life. I was totally, and so is Jack. He's just kind of like, he thinks he's hot shit.
Yeah.
And then obviously, old Jack is just kind of ashamed of this because at a certain point, he doesn't look at Bridget and think like, oh, great looking girl. He just thinks like, oh, young lady, and that's what happens when you're Jack's age and our age. So he doesn't think the way that young Jack does.
Again, trying to avoid the paradox. It just keeps every which way.
Yeah, and then this is the joke with Boof that I really want to put in here was that when he goes into the bathroom, he comes out chewing on a condom and he thinks it's bubble gum.
Yeah.
There you go. Really want to do that stat joke.
It's a good Boof joke.
And then, but I love and this was a Tony idea, is like we should have Street Angel and Boof like instantly get along, because in the Boof comic he was sort of friends with a kid. He was sort of he was like E.T. except totally E.T. meets Beavis and Butthead, I guess, was kind of the original pitch I think Todd had for it.
Yeah, like E.T. if they leaned into the boogers.
And so, right, yeah, exactly. So he instantly is like on the level of maturity as Jessie, although she's sort of more mature than the kids usually, but she likes him right away because it's sort of like, let's have your cool, fun alien friend.
Yeah, I like their interaction. I'd love to see these characters continue to interact. I think it'd be fun to see kind of what else could come from this. Was there characters that you guys wanted to do that you didn't, or you said it comes later in the book? But
at a certain point, I kept going like, well, let's ask about this one, let's ask about this one, and Tim was like, well, you have to service each one of these characters in a crossover, which is sort of like he's been doing superhero comics so much longer than me. So I was just like, let's just get everybody in the world. And he had a really good point that like, we'll just get this, like these, we got all the ones we asked for. And then the point is like, give each one of them a moment or give them something to,
Yeah, we wanted each of them to have an arc, which I thought was, if we had too many of them, we wouldn't have room, even though it'd be fun to have them show up. But I think there's like a difference between, and we figured out a way to get all the shit in later, which obviously we'll get to those pages. But the initial point was like, let's really focus on these characters and figure out a reason why we wanted them. And we wanted, Fire Breather because he's kind of the antithesis of Jack. Like he's just sort of a freak. And in the beginning of the story, that's how he felt. Duncan did. And so, Jack's obviously this overconfident superhero guy. And then Bridget had the family thing because Dynamo 5, they're all related. They all like half sisters and half brothers. So the family thing was an important thing. Like when we threw these out, we're sort of like, they have to have a kind of a story reason, kind of. The other ones were just, I thought we were talking about using Street Angel, and I was like, well, that's perfect because she fights ninjas and the Flame is kind of a ninja. So it was just like,
yeah, Stryker, we wanted to have a guy who's like the leader, who like sort of can play straight man to all these like weirder characters as well.
Yeah. And he ended up, I think, as far as we needed Stryker in here. We needed the guy who's like, because Crossjack is sort of becomes the default star of that group of characters, but you needed a character like Stryker, who's the one that's like, he's the one actually doing stuff. He's the one actually running the show. And he's also not egotistical. He's not bothered, but he's just like, whatever, just got to get it done. So
who's this old lady with the gun based on?
That's my friend Karen. And she's married to one of my best friends, Adam, who plays the Flame. And she would be mortified that I made her look this old. That's the thing I always have to like pre-apologize when I do photo ref for these people. It's like, this character is going to be old, or this is going to be fatter, or this is going to be a monster or whatever.
I love that panel with her with the gun, fucking lizard people just blasting away. That's awesome.
And this is obviously the moment where if you would put some of the shit that happens in 2023 in a comic in 1990 something, people would be like, what are you talking about? People think that there's a conspiracy to like drain children of their blood brain juices. And like, what? And they voted for the guy who hosts that fucking stupid Apprentice show. Like, you would think it was the apocalypse. You would think it was the stupidest. And that's what kind of how this runs.
I mean, also though, that's sort of the plot of Shadowhawk Zero, the draining children of their juices. Well, like they had a laboratory where they were making AIDS.
That's
Oh
really
God. I just read that recently. I just read that issue again recently. It is such a weird concept too.
Every once in a while, Jim would throw out some crazy shit,
Yeah.
But yeah. So and then obviously, old Jack knows how to grab the shield and use it as he grew up on it, but he doesn't. Is no longer allowed to do it because of the copyright stuff. So he gives him back his shield. But yeah, then this is the big setup here for the conceit that what he's trying to blame his younger self for is Mother's Day, but obviously there's a whole lot of other stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where you get the inkling too of like what happens at the end in terms of is there going to have any effect on the future or the present? Just lights this lady on fire.
Or he sort of just doesn't stop her from being started on fire. So this was our take on the Flame, was that the Flame would never go bad. Like he, as a personality from the old stuff, but he would at a certain point be like, I can't save this world, so I'm not going to bother. So he could save this lady, but she shot him and punched holes in the thing and then started herself on fire. So he just lets her go because he has to, he's got other stuff to do.
He's a cold motherfucker, dude.
Yeah,
he's got to conserve his strength and just watches her burn.
We get into it later. He's got this sort of page where he lays out his whole deal later, but it's just like this world means nothing to him.
Mm-hmm.
He's seen what it is and he does not like it.
Yeah, it's a mess, so he's not going to bother. And then so usually the big cosmic crossover has a scene at like some kind of citadel at the end of the universe or some shit. Ours takes place in a Walmart in Hayward, Wisconsin. And this is, I think, my favorite of the because we set it up that Street Angel, she has problems with authority in her comics, so we figured like when she sees like a big tough military dude, she would be like unable to resist. So she's always just sort of like making fun of him or not listening to him, and he just tolerates it the entire time. But then she says, "Hey, look, Stryker, mittens for sale. Buy two, give two free." And I thought that's a great little moment for Street Angel.
What was the choice to bring in a character from Love Everlasting? I didn't ask that earlier when we were talking about the character, but what was that about?
Well, so if you read Love Everlasting, Joan Peterson, her whole deal is that she's sort of reborn in all these different eras, and if she falls in love, she usually gets killed, and so then she ends up sort of rebooting into a different thing. And so we thought if we're going to do a big time thing, then we should have a character who's time involved. And Tom King is a really good friend of mine, and I really like that comic, so that was an easy call to just say, Tom, can we use Joan from your book? I
do like the idea that like amongst all of the like pulp scenarios that she pops up in, that there's like this one, the undrawn Elsa Chartier issue where she just pops up in a superhero crossover for a minute and then pops back out.
Yeah, right. Like, because it's implied that tons of these things happen, so there must have been one inevitably where she ends up at Walmart. It's just that Elsa didn't want to draw it and Tom didn't want to write it because they had all kinds of other things to do. That was our thinking, and thankfully Tom humored us on this one.
I'm very happy about this time travel joke.
I love this joke. I think it's great.
I like how it's really how you lettered it. Damn girl, your jeans a time machine, because they said it's because, and then pause.
Yeah.
And
I can see that.
And then she just looks at him, that's all.
Yeah.
That was
her look says it all, man.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite sequences too. There's the whole how they're just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
It's so embarrassing.
Yeah, I feel like if they had another page, I would have loved to to pump up his confidence a little bit more before that, where he's like, okay, here we go. No problem here.
He said, "I'm the
That's
can't
gonna
miss
work.
kid," right? He would. That's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
he's. I'm the can't miss kid. I will sink this one, but we didn't have room, so.
And he's fun, and it's funny because too, like you start to see here that like Crossjack, like young Crossjack is like starting to like it's affecting him and the way he's perceiving himself, because he has, as he's calling him, old man Jack in his head, telling him what a piece of crap he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's clear that he's starting to doubt. It's giving him doubts. He's like, well, maybe I'm not right if I turn out like that guy. Oh, and this one is one where, so this panel's Tony didn't want to draw like the normal people, so I had to do it. So there you go. There's me drawing normal local man type people.
Yeah.
There's the Cowboy America shirt and the cowboy hat and the lady with the pink shirt. Those are me.
Every once in a while, we sort of break format, and I'm just like, I don't have time to draw these fleeing pedestrians. Please help.
I love Booth and Duncan in the truck and their reaction as they're flying in the truck.
Yeah, that's great.
Poor Boof. He gets all charcoal.
The Street Angel panel is really great too.
Yeah, that one is. I really like drawing Jim style. That was like the ears that they're just sort of like Muppet ears on the side is such a nice idea, and it just, yeah, perfect head construction for a character. I actually borrowed the ninja pose from Jim. I think I might have. No, I don't think maybe I made that one up, but definitely her doing the sort of like crane kick was, yeah. And then she had to be like she's our physical brawler, whereas Striker's he's our sniper, right? He can take 4 shots at the same time. So
The tactical guy. Yeah.
this one, and of scenes to draw where we draw, both of us draw. Fight scene is actually the hardest one to do.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
And this, but I think it turned out pretty good. I love that when she gets hit, she gets the same sound effect as when she hits somebody.
Yeah.
Rug sound effect. But yeah, so the setting up the fight scene and playing it out and having it pay off with looking right. We thought we did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
These are great fight scenes. I love Stryker, just saying "fuck you, little man," too.
Yeah, I don't know if Stryker actually is foul mouthed.
I've never heard him say "fuck."
Obviously, not in the early Cyberforce comics, because those are pretty much all ages. That was a little bit of artistic license that we took, just based on sort of like the vibe of Top Cow. Like now it's just like, yeah, they're badass.
Yeah.
What did they because I'm sure you guys sent the PDFs of this to the creators for the characters you use. What were some of the reactions you got?
Everybody was kind of just cool with it. I don't know. The one that was most enthusiastic was Jay Ferber. He was really excited about it. Tom was pretty excited about it. He had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, but Phil and Andy both they said they were honored. They're always way too nice, because Duncan does get like a real cool moment, and so I feel like they dug that.
Yeah. But then this is where you get to see this is why the Flame is so pissed off, because these were, he's from a world of like good superheroes, and obviously part of the thing when the Image Universe stuff started was that they weren't really beheld to like the old rules, and an ongoing conceit of the story that we kind of always go back to is that some of the Image early stuff, they didn't really do that much superheroing. Like it's not like they ever like saved a cat from a tree, or you know what I mean? Like it was always like they were mostly fighting other superheroes or each other, or because it was just cool. It was just badass, and it didn't have like this sort of post World War II morality stuff, or it was sort of a different approach. So so he represents that. He's unimpressed with these characters and their lack of solid morality and running around in their underpants.
Yeah, Bloodstrike wasn't concerned with like the social good, or like how the community at all.
Right. Yeah, which is interesting. Like I look back at it now and see it's kind of fascinatingly like it's more on the side of like the sort of fascist side of superhero stuff, than on the like public good community sides of superhero stuff. So it's interesting. But I like that he gets hit with Gatorade. In the script, it just said hit with a bottle.
I think it said Gatorade bottle, because I'll get real specific in my head when I'm drawing stuff, and I was like, well, it says Gatorade, it has to be Gatorade, even though we wrote it and it could be whatever. But I'm just like, well,
I think you could have taken off the logo and I would have known that was a Gatorade bottle too.
The real iconic
shape.
Gatorade. Yeah. Felipe Sobrero on the colors on this one, and he did a great job on that Gatorade specifically, but on everything.
Yeah, Felipe is an awesome artist. So Felipe does usually the backup colors in Lookman. And so for this issue, Brad was really busy, and we were like, well, the whole thing is one story instead of as much as the flashbacks of the other one. So Felipe colored the entire thing, and so he kind of does a Brad Simpson thing in parts of it, but he has the different characters kind of colored in different styles, and man, he did an awesome job on this.
I
like
this
that
panel too.
Jack has just like a metal, like, or like an aluminum shovel.
Yes, no shovel.
Dirty art shovel, which is like, all these weapons are like not super effective. Like, they're just like tossing whatever they can at this guy.
Yeah. I like that about Jack in general, like in the main story that we do, is just that like his superpower is that anything, like bullseye or whatever, like anything could be a weapon.
It's a weapon, yeah.
Yeah, if you hit him in the right place, yeah, totally.
So here's the Flame making his case. This is where we sort of fall into the format a little bit, because we do 3 pages in a row where it's like somebody makes their case. But I feel like it works. It sort of like leads up to this ending.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I like this. I mean, he's basically fighting against, to me, it kind of almost sounds like a commentary, much like how Kingdom Come was like kind of an answer to, what Mark Waid and Alex Ross felt about, like, that era of what people were calling the Dark Age, right? Like the ultra violent, gritty, grim and gritty, so, and that's kind of like the vibe I got with this character.
Very astute. This character could very well just be made up out of quotes from Mark Waid and Alex Ross in those days.
Well, I mean, but I read a whole bunch of Flame comics before we started, and he is that guy. So it totally, those are hard to get. You have to steal those. You can't buy those anywhere. So I had to steal a bunch of Flame comics. But he's definitely got that, like, that old school, like that whole era of characters where they're like, they're for kids. They're kids superheroes. Like they were meant to be for, between 6 and 11-year-old, basically. Then the twist here being that Jack is, the young Crossjack is like, you know what? We should reboot this because I do not want to become you. Which I think is, that's the twist on our story here, is that, instead of like these guys having the same goals, they don't. The seat that we had going in for our cosmic story.
Yeah, I mean, why would he want to be him? He looks at him, he's like, you're a fucking loser, dude. You got nothing going for you. I don't want to be you. Yeah, if I can change it, I'm going to try.
Yeah, which is a weird thing, because I remember when I was a kid, I always had this like weird sort of obsession with like, what would I be in my 20s or 30s? Like, who would I be? Like, and I think every kid probably thinks that a little bit, like, you're just, and now he knows what he'll be in his 40s, and it's like, oh God, that's especially for a guy who's riding as high as Crossjack, that's like a really scary thing.
Yeah, and I think it's easier for like I'm just like saying, like, in my case, like for the younger version of myself to look maybe and be like, no, I'd probably change some shit that you've done, but but me now, like, I wouldn't change anything, because like I wouldn't want to risk losing some of what I have to maybe make small changes, right? Like I'm fine with everything in your past makes you who you are today, right? So
yeah, I think that's sort of a key to any kind of comfort or happiness in your 40s or 50s is accepting that you wouldn't be where you are if things hadn't gone the way they did. So you can have sort of little regrets, but if you have big regrets, I think, you kind of have to figure out a way to move on from it, because it'll paralyze you.
We got real deep here.
Well, I mean, about it, like this book is Tony and I working some shit out. Like there is no doubt about that. The book in general is, because we both have some regret, and we both, people who grew up with stories about these sort of like, regretless characters that get to do anything and don't feel particularly bad about it. And so it's sort of combining those things into a little therapeutic look, but also having them push each other a lot.
Yeah, hopefully, but when we get to the end of the whole Local Man thing, it'll sort of have gotten us to a place where it's like, there it is, peace, that's nice.
Yeah, or not.
This part right here is definitely like the core of the whole thing, just sort of like the concept made real in one panel, where he just gets to choke his younger self and go like, I fucking hate you, like I've never liked you, just sort of like, I remember typing that stuff out and just being like, getting on a roll, where Tim has to take it and just go like, all right, this is too much, you calm down. But
I mean, that's gotta be the job, right? That's gotta be the, some of it. And there was parts of this I was like, I'm not sure about some of the dialogue here. Like, you're worse than Billy Kincaid.
That's
like,
what I was gonna say. That's fucked up.
Yeah.
like a lot of children, man.
I mean, he's prone to hyperbole.
It's
Definitely Crossjack did not murder children.
Yeah, just the pure hatred he has for his younger self, just wishing that he was fucking dead. Like that's fucking harsh.
But it's also like this is definitely a conceit of the book that we felt like we had to get, if we're gonna do it, we had to get over it here. Because when the next arc, when we move on from stuff, he has to sort of go in a different direction. So yeah,
It is.
The sound effects behind him.
this is the entire reason we did this thing, was that Tony, as a young man, had a joke in which 4-armed striker says, "Now I got 5," and tears the dude's arm off. This was the entire reason.
That is not untrue. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, as soon as I was like, "Ooh, Striker," I was like, "Oh, finally." Me and Josh Fialkov pitched Cyberforce in like 2007 or 8. Josh was writing a bunch of stuff for Top Cow, and they were like, "Do you have an idea for Cyberforce?" And Josh was like, "I got a buddy that loves this stuff," and we got all kinds of ideas. And this joke, I don't even know if this joke was in the pitch or if it was just something I assumed. Like, of course they'll say yes, and then this joke will be the best thing ever. And they did not say yes. They were like, "How come we need your dumb little buddy? We just want you, the guy who's successful right now." And so I just, took that, let it fester for 15 years, and then
Plotted your revenge.
Yeah,
it's a good joke. I liked it.
Never let a good joke die. Yeah, I always loved Stryker in the comics, but I always wanted him to it was almost as if people were afraid to mention that he had 4 arms, And I was like, we should be leaning into this. This is awesome that he has 4 arms.
But the thing is, what he kind of comes out of that whole era of like, the grim military cyber guy, which obviously he is a response to. But there's something kind of like when you're doing it's like, yeah, but he's super weird. Like he would be kind of self-conscious and stuff.
Yeah.
He grew up with 4 arms, right? That's
Yeah,
part
he's a mutant.
He'd be hiding 2 of them behind his back.
Yeah,
like
not wanting to show him.
I always want to see, like, we never saw like Teen Striker, like 2 of his arms folded here, and he's got like a beer gut all the time. We never saw.
Yeah, that guy's got pathos. Here's the page where Tim draws like Andy and like Elsa Chartier on the same page.
So looks like, minimal styles. I think that's one of the reasons she's attracted to him, is that he looks like her. He doesn't have a lot of lines on him and stuff. So
right, he doesn't look like a Martian to her.
Yeah, right. But I love drawing that Elsa. The Joan faces after a while. I was like, oh, I really want to do this. So if Tom ever needs a one shot or something, pencil it.
I got to check that book out. I still haven't read Love Everlasting.
When she says, "Oh," and then she goes, "Oh shit!" In the comic, in Love Everlasting, when she jumps time, they always do that little interstitial panel. So that was a nice get there, Tony.
Thank you. They stopped doing it after a while, but in the beginning they did do it. Oh, here we go.
This is the money page right here.
Yeah, this one Tim was having the most fun on, and we were like sort of sending notes back and forth. This Battle Pope is the character that was the one we asked for somebody, and Kirkman was like, "What about Battle Pope?"
And we said, "Hell yes,
absolutely."
Actually,
was it Invincible?
Yeah, I asked for Invincible, and Robert said he couldn't use him because he was using him for a bunch of other stuff. And then I said, "Well, how about Battle Pope?" And he said, "Well, that's an easy yes." So we got Battle Pope. And then we set up the joke, which earlier in the issue, when Stryker is talking about how they all got to check in, they say that we got to call into the Supreme guy. So you could think that was Supreme from the Rob Liefeld universe, the Extreme stuff, but instead it's His Supreme Holiness Battle Pope, which again, total delight for me. I don't know if anyone else will enjoy it as much as I did, but yeah, I thought that was pretty fun.
People just on pins and needles waiting for Supreme to show up.
Yeah, exactly. Just you and me, but that's okay because I love Supreme, and so we also love Battle Pope. In fact, I've known Robert and Tony since 2000 in fact, because of Battle Pope. Because I was doing a book called Loaded Bible, and they were doing Battle Pope, and I was seated next to them at Chicago Comic-Con.
I had Blasphemers section.
Yeah, and so I met those guys then. So in 2000 and 2001, I met those guys. Nate Bellegarde, Corey, all those guys. So 20 fucking 3 years ago. Like, ouch. But there you go. So culminates in this moment when Battle Pope is shown to be the leader. Here's where we called in every favor we have, basically.
And a lot of them we didn't. We just sort of like took on faith that it would be cool. Like we're just like, they'll be fine with this.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
I think we showed John and Rob the Chew characters after the fact.
no, I asked.
Oh, you did? We
Actually,
definitely didn't ask about Citizen Pain.
Yeah, you didn't even ask that one. I figured we were good with, but the two that I didn't. Well, the one I didn't ask was Exit, because I figured Stevenson would be okay with it. I probably should have asked, but I figured he was okay with it. And then we did ask Copra's creator, Mikhail Fife, for those characters. Let's see, and all the rest of the Dynamo 5 guys. We asked Jim Valentino for Shadowhawk. That was pretty cool. And then we asked me, Tim Seeley, for Hack Slash characters.
And Love Bunny, Mr. Hell. I don't think we re-upped with Todd Knock if it was okay to use bootleg. He let us use her on a cover early on, and then we just sort of popped her in here too. I didn't check.
Oh no! Well, let's hope Todd's cool with it.
Yeah,
I'm sure he's fine with it.
Yeah, and then one of the things I like is that when they're checking in, and he says, Prophet's team, and then he said Poyo's team, because of course Poyo would be a leader of one of the teams,
yeah.
Right? That's his whole thing, is that he's like the impossible superhero as part of everything.
So and that's sort of how we got away with using some of the characters that we didn't get permission for, is we just sort of could throw them a name check. Prophet's there somewhere.
Then I also asked Robert if we could use Jesus from Battle Pope. So Jesus is there with Impact from Cyberforce, which is pretty awesome. Hopefully,
yeah.
We'll enjoy that moment. And then you get to hear Boof and his battle cry, skilling and killing and thrilling.
Which the addition that we made, he was always just skilling and thrilling because he was for kids. But we're like, well, let's go. Let's take it all the way, baby.
Right.
Yeah, that fucking, look at that hockey stick just split. Oh, dude.
Right, awesome. Right through the Black Terror.
Yeah.
A buddy of mine was very offended for he was an OG Black Terror fan. He was like, how dare you? Such indignity taken out by Boof.
This is vicious too. This fucking head cut right here.
Yeah. In the script, I wrote like he was going to take her head off, and Tim was like, nope.
Well, okay. Thought one, if it was an actual 90s Image comic, they absolutely would have cut her head off. And then on the other side of it, I wanted to do the thing like when she gets her head cut off, her body turns back into the Jungle Girl.
You're so wrapped up in this Golden Age.
I like that stuff a lot. And Tony's not.
Some Golden Age fan is going to really shit their pants when that happens.
Yeah.
They'd always wondered what might happen.
Well, she changes without much. It doesn't take much to change when you're a fan.
But here's sort of our epilogue, our Deathmate epilogue.
And this is, a sad moment for the Flame, but Jack is actually kind of compassionate towards him because they actually did live a life, a whole life as the same guy. So that would be pretty fucking devastating to see the guy die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do like this moment for Jack. Sort of shows a little bit of growth. Sort of leaves our readers with like what our guy's like now after all that.
Yeah, he's still kind of a moron, but he's a humane moron, which is why I like about him that he's kind of he's a pretty flawed guy.
Fun to write.
I think it makes him those kind of characters are more interesting, for sure.
But I don't want to also say that it's not fun to write Superman because the unflawed guy is also really fun to write. But Jack is pretty flawed, and he's also much more of a crime noir character. But there you go. You get your
you get the change that happened.
Yeah, check in with Mom and the flowers. A nice little coda.
Yeah,
but he's also got to walk 120 miles or whatever it is back
to down to Farmington.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun issue. I love this book. I love this series too. I'm very excited that it's coming back for a volume 2. Those variants you guys have for the new series, like homaging like early Image comics.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that was a move we obviously I did on Stray Dogs that we hadn't really done on Local Man, and like honestly we were like we could use better numbers on this book if we're going to keep going. Like there's like numbers will slip on every book. And if we're planning on doing this for, like 2, 3, 4 arcs, it's like we need to do something so that we can continue to make money on this and make this book. So we're like, let's trot out these homage variants. And Tim's like great at aping like the physical art, like doing like homaging art like that. And I'm real good at doing the design and the coloring stuff. So it's another one where it's like we can just sort of team up on that and collaborate and come up with something cool looking. So hopefully those light a fire under some people that haven't checked out the book yet. Volume 2 comes out in October. So it's basically this book comes out Wednesday, and then the trade comes out next month, and then the month after that, issue 6, which starts the second volume. So yeah, there's plenty of chances for people to jump on.
I kind of wanted to because I think the first arc was a big critical success. I think it's the best reviewed thing I've ever done. People really liked it, and I think we kind of wanted to let it sit and let people like hear about it, because I think word of mouth is sort of the only thing that sells stuff these days, really. And so, letting people go, this was really, really good. You should check out the trade. Logo Man Gold is meant to be like hey, you heard this was good? Try this one. And it's just a one shot and you can enjoy it. And then that'll set you up for, you can get the trade, or you can get the next arc called the Dry Season, which begins with Logo Man 6. We can do all those things, and we'd be happy to have you because I think it's a great book. It's one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. So I hope all that passion and affection for it transfers over to everybody else.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's a fantastic series. I loved it from the beginning. I mean, I was already a fan of both of you before the book came out, so I was going to check it out. But yeah, it's definitely like knowing kind of what is loosely inspiring at 90s image and stuff like that, but it being so much more than that, I think is what makes the book special. Because like you go into thinking like, okay, cool, like it's this 90s character, on the flip side, but then you have like the present day and how he's dealing with all these other things. And the fact that he can't even use his own superhero name because he doesn't own the rights to it. I don't think I've seen that before. So, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I've never seen it in any comic book. So I thought that was a brilliant hook too. But yeah, anybody that hasn't checked it out, go pick it up. It's awesome. And I think this is also a very good entry point too. I think you could even jump in with this gold issue and you don't really, not to say you don't need the issues before, but you can just read this and then jump into the trade the next month as well.
Yeah, we made it that way on purpose for sure. We wanted to make this like a new reader friendly, something flashy. Hopefully shops can just put it up by their register or whatever. And just like, here it is, brand new thing. Check it out.
Oh yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for taking time out of your schedule to chat the book with me. It's been a blast. I can't wait for the next volume. Yeah, I'd love to have you guys back on again. Maybe we could talk volume 1. I know we didn't really get to talk too much of that first volume, but I'd love to do that with you guys if you're down.
Yeah, absolutely. This is cool. I've never done a scene specific audio commentary before, so I'm down for sure.
All right, cool.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, dude. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ryan.